Joining us from Berlin is Felipe Rodriguez, who is Director Heavy Duty Vehicle Program at ICCT, the International Council on Clean Transportation. Welcoming him, we first ask Felipe to explain what the ICCT is and what are its main targets.
Thank you for the invitation. The ICCT is a non-profit international organization. We focus on doing technical research to inform policymakers. The organization was founded about 20 years ago with the explicit objective of providing first-rate, unbiased research to environmental regulators working on transport. So back in the day, it was about air pollution. Now we're talking about electrification. So accordingly, going with the demands of the policymakers, we have a strong focus on electrification today, on decarbonization.
Mr. Rodriguez, according to ICCT studies and reports, would it be correct to follow also other paths such as biogas, biofuels, e-fuels in order to make energy transition in freight transportation more gradual and effective, especially in long-haul transportation?
So there is a common saying in some climate circles that it goes electrify everything and decarbonize the grid. And I think that represents as well our vision for the road freight sector. It is challenging for us to see the environmental and economic advantages of other solutions, specifically when thinking about those solutions being bridge solutions towards the goal of fully decarbonizing these vehicles. So I can touch on a few points. So first of all, when you look at the environmental performance, and let's talk about carbon emissions of electric vehicles, electric trucks across the spectrum of operation, we find that on a life cycle assessment, that is including the manufacturing emissions, the emissions produced during the usage of the vehicle, and at the end, the recycling of that vehicle. Battery electric trucks can reduce the carbon footprint compared to diesel in about 63% today. That is using the average European grid that is not completely carbon free, right? If we would move to a completely carbon neutral grid, a decarbonized electricity grid, then the benefit would be about 90%. So there is a massive benefit that you can get already today from moving towards electrification. And the question is, well, can you get the same benefit if you go alternative pathways? And the answer is, it depends on where you put the box of your analysis. So if we look at the whole European system, biofuels, e-fuels, biogas, natural gas are definitely not going to be a solution for decarbonization. And that simply has to do with the fact that there is just not enough feedstock availability of these fuels to decarbonize the entire system. But if you look at very niche applications where there is already plentiful of supply of these advanced biofuels or biogas, then I think the users of those vehicles should be locally incentivized to do what they can do today, right? As we move towards an electric fleet, right, in the coming decades, there is an important role for combustion-powered trucks to play. Going from improving the aerodynamics of those vehicles to putting better tires, but also to improving the engine itself, right? So over the years, manufacturers have been gradually improving the efficiency of the combustion engine, of the diesel combustion engine. And there's still more that can be done, right? Because squeezing those few last percentage points in terms of efficiency, going a bit above the 50% threshold, that can definitely have an impact on reducing CO2 emissions, improving the TCO of those vehicles.
Thank you. Talking now about urban transportation, what are the major European cities doing in order to support the transition towards zero-emission commercial vehicles in terms, for example, of low-emission zones or public charging infrastructure? Is there any valuable case study worth mentioning?
I think we can look at what cities in the Netherlands are doing. So when it comes to the power of urban centers to drive electrification, we're talking about a specific use case that includes, of course, a mix of on-road highway transportation, right, long distance perhaps or medium distance, with access to the city centers, right? And this is a very specific use case that cities can really drive forward with policies they implement. So when we look at the objectives that many Dutch cities have to really create zero-emission freight zones, I think this is fantastic, right? And I think this will be an important driver of the demand, as we're already seeing in some of the fleets that operate in the Netherlands. The Netherlands, relatively small country, right, compared to others in the European Union, has definitely higher percentage of electric trucks in their fleets. And this is largely due to many of these policies, of course. So it is also not a surprise that Mylens, you know, the charging operator resulting from the joint venture from the truck manufacturers, Truck&Van, Daimler, and Volvo Group, has set shop in the Netherlands and has opened one of the first fast charging hubs dedicated only for trucks, right, in the town of Venlo.
Let's talk about policies now. Many people think that 2024 may be a crucial year to understand what EU institutions will decide when it comes to energy transition in freight transportation. Do you expect some big changes compared to what's been decided so far?
In 2023, there was a very important discussion around a regulation called the CO2 standards for heavy-duty vehicles, for trucks and buses. This regulation that exists already since a number of years sets targets for the truck manufacturers to reduce their CO2 emissions from their new vehicle fleet, right? So the targets that we have today are 15% reduction by 2025 and 30% reduction by 2030. Now, over the last year, what was mostly discussed in Brussels was the extension of these CO2 standards to cover more vehicle categories, right? Not only the big trucks, but also the smaller trucks, buses as well, trailers as well, of extending the targets out to 2040 and of increasing the stringency, the CO2 reduction targets that we have for each one of those years compared to what we have today. To give you an idea of, for those of you who don't know, the regulation would set a 90% CO2 reduction target for 2040, right? So just leaving that 10% margin for maybe some vehicles that are hard to decarbonize, but the rest of it needs to be zero emissions, zero tailpipe emissions, right? And this includes battery electric trucks, fuel cell electric trucks, and hydrogen combustion trucks. So those three solutions would be the only ones that would be allowed for 90% of those vehicles in 2040. So at the European level, this is the one policy to watch. And we're very confident that we're going to have a very good outcome from the negotiations. Now, there are a number of other policies that were already decided in 2023 and before that now go into the implementation stage at the national level, right, at the European member states. And the implementation of these policies is as important as the regulation itself set in the framework, right? So just to mention three of those, we have the Alternative Fuel Infrastructure Regulation, which sets targets for the individual member states of the European Union to deploy public charging infrastructure for light-duty and heavy-duty vehicles, right? setting the minimum power and the minimum distance between these charging hubs. We also have now the implementation of the Eurovignette directive that sets carbon pricing as a component of the road tolls, right? Now, member states have also to translate that directive into national regulation. And there is one last element that it's going to be equally important, which is the implementation of the Renewable Energy Directive, the recast of the Renewable Energy Directive. And this is a very complicated regulation setting the targets for all kinds of fuels that we use in different modes. But one important element is how that renewable energy gets credited when used in transport. And we've seen some important developments in Germany, the Netherlands, for example, where truck operators who recharge their vehicles using green energy contracts, for example, can create revenue for their operations from the implementation of this renewable energy directive. So again, a possibility there for improving the economics of these vehicles. And this is central, right, for the transition towards zero emission trucking, is that the economics need to work. And we're quite confident that this is going to happen in the transition phase out to 2030, for example. These policy instruments will be fundamental, right? But in 2030, our studies show that the total cost of ownership of battery electric trucks is going to be much superior, about 20 to 25% lower than that of a diesel truck. So hopefully by then the supply, the infrastructure will be in place to support the increased demand that is going to come from operators, just because, as you know, industry has tight margins, and anything that can reduce the TCO is going to be adopted.
Thank you very much, Felipe Rodriguez, for being with us, really.